This was back in November of 2018 and takes place in North Carolina. I was 14 at the time this happened. My family and I had just moved across states. We'd just gotten to the city where we planned on living after quite a long road trip. We were all extremely hungry, so we decided to go grab dinner before we went to pick up the keys to our new house. We went to this local pizza shop. Since we had our dogs with us because we hadn't moved into our house quite yet, we decided to eat out in the car. I'm a pretty fast eater compared to the rest of my family though, so I finished well before any of them. After I was done, I decided to bring my puppy out to do her business real quick. We were standing just a little ways up from the car, playing in the leaves on the ground together. I grew up in Florida, you see, so I wasn't used to seeing these large piles of autumn leaves. There I was, just living my best life, not paying attention to my surroundings, when all of a sudden I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned back to see a man. My dog noticed him immediately and tried to jump on him as she does with anyone. I pulled her back while I backed away from this random guy. As I observed him closer, he appeared to be in his mid-40s or 50s. He smiled creepily at me, a very forced smile. He said in this scruffy southern voice, "You have my dog, my border collie." Immediately, a red flag went off in my mind. My dog very obviously looks nothing like a border collie. Now, let me tell you, I'm horrible at confrontation. So instead of confronting him directly, I just nervously said, "I think you're mistaken, sir. This is my dog." I didn't even think to tell him how my dog didn't look anything like what he was describing. I looked over quickly to my parents' car that was just a couple of feet ahead of me, unsure of what to do in this situation. It seemed they hadn't even noticed the man approaching me, as they were all on their phones. The man then asked me this, "Well, if that's not my dog, would you be able to come help me look for it?" I could feel my stomach drop in that moment. I didn't want to make a scene. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting or not, but I'd read my fair share of kidnapping and sex trafficking horror stories, so I did have a vague idea in the back of my mind about what was going down. He then said something along the lines of, "I have some money in my truck for you if you'll help me." My hands were sweating at this point. This was something straight out of a Reddit thread or a movie or something. He pointed over to a very sketchy, run-down-looking truck. I told him I was too busy and I had to leave right now. Best of luck finding his dog though. I was still trying to keep him on my good side. Looking back on it now though, I don't know why I didn't just tell him my parents were right there. If I did, maybe he would have backed off. I guess I was overly worried about what might happen. I was trying to be polite so we wouldn't get mad and escalate things further. All of a sudden, he grabbed my dog's leash out of my hand and said he had treats at his truck. He then started to walk away with my dog. I grabbed the leash back and tried to pull it away from him, sternly saying, "I have to go right now." As I tried to walk away, he grabbed my wrist and fully ripped the leash out of my hands, throwing it to the ground. He began to pull me along with him, mumbling something like, "Just come and see what I have for you." My dog, the good, sweet girl she was, followed after us and started barking fiercely. He was dragging me pretty firmly along with him. I'm pretty small at 5'4", and I don't have much upper body strength. All I could do was start screaming for him to let go of me. My parents, alarmed after hearing me scream and seeing our dog chasing after me barking, saw the man pulling me against my will. Immediately, they started sprinting after me. I started screaming even louder. I think he was alarmed when he heard me yell out to my mom, as he could see her now running towards us. The sudden realization that my parents were right there in the car the whole time must have really shocked him. He let me go and tried to make a run for it. We didn't decide to chase after him. My parents were just glad to still have me. This was definitely not a good way to start off our new life in North Carolina. Not even lived there a day yet. I don't wish this sort of thing to ever happen to anyone, as it was extremely terrifying. My advice for you, though, is don't be afraid to use your words, even if they might anger the person. I went to college in a historic mid-sized city in Florida, and at the time lived in a duplex downtown, maybe about 3 blocks from campus or so. The city is known to be pretty safe, and I lived in a pretty decent area with large historic homes near me. It took place about 3 years ago. A little backstory that will become relevant. The duplex I lived in had a front door that locked, and then both the upstairs and downstairs units had their own locking door as well. I lived downstairs and had 2 roommates, but this specific night only one of my roommates was home. We knew the girls that lived upstairs, but really only spoke to them in passing. When they moved in, we emphasized how important it was to us for them to keep the main front door locked at all times. They always made sure to do a really good job of doing so. So, me and my roommate are in for the night, knowing the front door is locked and smoking a few joints. At some point, we hear a knock at the front door and quickly realize the girls upstairs must have ordered a pizza. Later on, we came to find that they'd forgotten to lock the front door again after receiving that pizza. So, we finally go to sleep in our own rooms. Since I had a queen bed, I would often sleep with my phone and laptop right next to me in my bed. A couple of hours after I'd initially fallen asleep, I was suddenly woken up by something I didn't recognize at first. As I came to of it, I came to realize there was a man standing over my bed. As soon as I realized I was not dreaming, I noticed he was quickly moving my phone and computer off of my bed and moving my comforter as well, trying to climb in. I started asking the man who he was, what he's doing here. I was extremely confused and still groggy. I was also still slightly high from before I'd gone to sleep. The only thing he said to me, multiple times, was that he was just trying to get into bed. At this point, I began to panic, as my mind obviously went right to the worst. I was hoping that maybe my roommate had invited some random Tinder guy over and he'd simply gone to the wrong room. But the more I tried to question him, all he had to say was that he was going to get into bed with me. I did own pepper spray and a stun gun, but I had left them on a shelf that the man was right in front of, so there was no way I would be able to grab them without escalating the situation. Realizing I needed to do something quickly, I blurted out, "There are 5 people who live in this house, and if you don't get the fuck out right now, I will scream. They'll be here in seconds." Luckily, that was all it took to scare the man off. I don't know if he brought something with him or if he stole something from me, but I did see him grab at something in the dark and run out of my room. As soon as he left, I shut the door and locked it and tried to find my phone. I couldn't find it anywhere. Then I quickly realized that between my room and the front door was the room of my friend that was still home. As scared as I was in that moment, I was even more terrified that maybe the man had gone into her room. I grabbed my stun gun and my knife, counted to 3, and ripped open the door. I burst into my roommate's room, only to find her fast asleep. There was no evidence of the man still being around. I quickly woke her up and told her what happened, and she asked me if I was sure I wasn't dreaming. I even began to question myself until I walked out of her room and saw our front door wide open. I went to my room to search for my phone and finally found it, hidden under a pile of clothes across the room from where I'd left it earlier. That sent a chill up my spine, as I immediately knew for a fact someone had been in my house and room while I was sleeping, at least long enough to take and hide my phone. That only worsened my suspicions of his intentions. I ran back to my roommate's room, who at this point believed me. We barricaded ourselves in and called 911. Within minutes, there were cars swarming our street and yard, and they yelled for us to quickly leave the residence and run towards them. At least a dozen officers came rushing in and searched every inch of our apartment. We woke up the girls upstairs and searched their apartment as well to ensure the man had well and truly left. The officers had me write a statement, and I gave them a description of the man. To this day, I've never heard a single thing about the case. I just feel incredibly lucky with the outcome of the situation. The thought of his intentions terrifies me though, and additionally, the fact he was never caught scares me. I would hate for anyone to have to go through the pure fear I did. I will add there was a chance he might have been on drugs or mentally ill, and perhaps had no bad intentions. However, because he was never caught, I'll never be able to know. With the fact that he tried to hide my phone, I can only assume the worst. So I'm a bartender at a gentleman's club. Our uniform, if you can call it that, is a very short, skimpy black dress and black bra. Due to my uniform being the way it is, I do my best to not have to go out in public directly after work. This is due to dirty looks and perverted comments that I really don't have the time or patience for. Back before the current state of the world, I had just gotten off work. It was around 2:30 a.m. I believe, and I decided to run to my local Walmart to grab some dog food and other household items. I was thinking there probably wouldn't be anyone there besides staff so late at night. I ran in with a jacket on as well, to try and be at least a little bit modest. I went directly to the pet aisles. I could see there was a guy stocking the shelves. I gave a small wave and smiled, and proceeded to looking for my dog's brand of food. I grabbed a 20-pound bag, and the man asked if I needed some help. I'm not really a small girl, but I do have a slight frame. I'm tall but very skinny, if that makes sense. I told him I was fine, thanked him, and headed to the grocery section. I was in the freezer area when my stalker/stalker showed up again, this time with another guy. They were just standing there, watching me decide which pizza to pick. When I turned to leave, the man once again asked if I needed any help. I told him no, thanked again, and smiled. I then made my way to the checkout aisle. On my way out, I saw a man heading out about 10 feet behind me. I quickly walked to my car, threw my purchases in the passenger side, jumped in, and locked my doors immediately. I was worried this person would try to follow me. All I wanted to do was go home. I felt dumb after realizing the man was going to his own car, and it was situated nowhere near me. Breathing a sigh of relief, I started my 15-minute drive home. I was about halfway there when I noticed that black car behind me, taking all the same turns as I was. I live in a very rural area. It's possible he lived nearby, but there weren't many people who ever took these roads, especially not this late at night. I turned a road after mine, and he made the exact same turn. This led to a dead-end road with only a cow farm at the very end, so I knew now he was definitely following me. I called my boyfriend and told him what was going on. I didn't want to drive home where he would know where I lived, and asked my boyfriend to meet me at Walmart instead. I sped the whole way there, hoping a cop was sitting somewhere and would pull me over. The black car was right on my ass. I pulled into the Walmart parking lot and parked directly under a street lamp. The black car pulled into the spot directly across from mine. Now I was freaking out. 15 seconds later, I saw my boyfriend's truck rushing into the lot. He pulled up right next to me, asked if I was okay, and I pointed out the car to him. My boyfriend was not a small man. He was about 6'4", and very muscular as well. His arms alone were about the size of my head. He's a very intimidating person if you don't know him, but really he's a very quiet and kind man. He hopped out of his truck and started to walk over to that car, yelling at them. "You need to talk to her about something, or you need to talk to me." The guy in the black car immediately rushed off. I don't know if it was the same man who was hanging out with the stalker or what, but that's why I don't go out after work anymore. I was in college at the time this happened. My roommate was a born-again Christian, and she invited me to her Bible study and church all the time. Eventually, I did go with her, and kept going as well. I wasn't a big fan of the pastor, but there were a lot of nice young adults who liked to have clean, sober fun. I didn't drink or party at all, so I felt like I fit right in. I didn't necessarily agree with everything they believed in though. Just the more normal stuff, like God, helping the poor, not some of the more extreme things. This one guy in the Bible study, Drew, was pretty quiet. He was good looking as well. He seemed like he knew everything about the Bible, which really amazed me. At the time, I thought, wow, he knows so much more than me. He's so wise. I was only 21 and he was 27. He wasn't a college student or anything, he just worked, which I later learned maybe he didn't even do that. We were going to go on a young adults retreat, and because I worked, I couldn't leave early on Friday to drive up to the mountains with the girls in the group. Mutual friends said I could ride with Drew instead, so I said okay. On the way up, Drew was pretty quiet for the first hour, not very friendly at all, and it was a long trip as well. As we started to get closer to the location, he began to warm up a bit though. We grabbed some pizza, and he paid, which was nice. Then he stopped the car just so we could look at the stars. Even played some Brian McKnight. He was quickly turning it into a date, but I didn't know or see it that way back then. I was starting to like him and feel like we had a connection though. He was just about to drop me off at the girls' cabin when he suddenly got very serious and told me that something had happened between him and another girl in our church group. He told me she was simply telling lies about him and not to believe whatever I heard. He didn't explain what actually happened, mind you, and didn't say who this was either. I entered the cabin and all the girls were there. Very quickly, one girl, Bree, who was the youngest in the entire group at 19, told all of us this. "Ladies, there is a wolf in sheep's clothing among us at this retreat." Now, if you don't know church folk, they get very dramatic and tend to talk like this all the time. So in my mind, I just thought, okay, here's some juicy drama coming up. She told us this story about how she was talking to some guy here, but he started stalking her and wouldn't take no for an answer, even threatened to hurt her sister. Now my spidey senses were tingling. I realized that this must be what Drew was telling me about. The church group didn't know who it was because she refused to say. She said she didn't want to stir gossip and the leadership would handle it on their own. Drew eventually left the weekend retreat early. There goes my ride back, I thought. I didn't know if he was asked to leave or what. Later that week, though, Drew asked me to hang out, and I agreed. I still liked him, and I didn't know who to believe at this point. On our hangout, we didn't really do anything. He took me to the mall and read the Bible to me. Okay, that was a little bit weird. He then parked his car on some suburban lookout and just said he was a view guy who really liked views. I was not one to be impressed by suburban lights. Overall, it was just very boring. I decided to give him another chance though. I invited him to come see a play with me. When he came, he immediately met one of my good friends, Brian. Brian introduced us to his boyfriend, Nick. I'm in theater, so I have many gay friends. For the majority of the rest of the date though, Drew lectured me about how all gays are going to hell, and I must not really love them if I didn't stop to tell them that. I began to cry because of this ugly argument in his car. He argued with me for hours in the lot. I just wanted to go home. It turned into the worst date ever. Obviously, I didn't agree with what he said. He then told me I needed to give up on my dream of being an actress, because what if the Lord didn't want me to do that? Theater is something I'd been doing my whole life, not to mention my major as well. His reasons for me giving it up had nothing to do with the impracticality of it, but simply because God said so. I began to see that this guy was nuts. I got home and I offered to make us some cocoa to just kind of end things as friends, or at least on a better note. I knew I would see him at church in the future, and we had mutual friends as well. Things were going to get weird if it ended badly. He tried to get sexual with me and then blamed me for tempting him. I ended up crying even more. I just wanted him to go home, but I was so emotionally exhausted I didn't really know what to do. He eventually left, called me and texted me that week, but I refused to respond. Sunday night rolled around once more. I was talking to my friend Tim, who no longer went to that church anymore. I told him I'd gone on a date with Drew, and before I could even tell him how it went, Tim said, "What? That guy is crazy. You need to abort that mission right now." Turns out he was close with Bree and her family. Drew really was a stalker and had really threatened to hurt Bree's sister. I didn't know what to do. I hung up and called my mom and tried to tell her what happened, what Tim told me about Drew, how it was such weird timing considering what happened to me. While I was on the phone with my mom, I got a sudden knock at the door. It was 11 p.m. on a Sunday night. I looked out to see who it was, only to find no one was out there. I went to get my roommate and ask her if she could sit with me in the front room. I was freaked out now. There was another knock at the door. I peeked and it was Drew, looking all in a frenzy. I asked him what he was doing there. He said he needed to talk to me. I wasn't answering my phone, so this was the only way. The conversation was getting a bit long in the tooth. My roommate was sitting there in anticipation. I told her she could go back to her room and that it was okay. I let him come in like a dumbass because I'd been conditioned to be overly nice. This was a big mistake. We started talking, but as soon as my roommate left, he pulled out a knife. He started saying how he was worried my neighbors had done something to me because I wasn't answering his texts. That he didn't know what kind of situation he'd be walking into. I have zero fighting skills and no experience in this situation at all. All I could do was to ask him as calmly as possible, "Hey, can you put the knife away maybe?" He asked me if I wanted the knife. I said no. I somehow talked him down and got him to leave. The next morning, my mind was a lot clearer. I felt like I needed to tell my mom what happened. She had me tell my dad as well, who had me tell the church youth leader and security at my apartment. I told the cop the whole story too, said the guy was definitely a stalker, and I would see him again unless the police visited him. I said it was fine. I thought everything would be okay. I just didn't want any more drama. I had never talked to a cop about anything before. I didn't understand how serious it was, I think. My mistake. The next night I went to a party, another church-related one. Drew was not supposed to be there. He'd even told me beforehand he wasn't going. Well, there he was. I decided to leave in that moment, but my 21-year-old self didn't think to ask someone to walk me out. I figured if I left and he was still there, problem solved. I didn't anticipate him following me. I was walking to my car in the dark apartment parking lot when I heard him call out my name. He was following me. I started to run, and he began to chase me. I was clicking my car to open, thinking to myself, this is how the white girl dies in the horror movies, because she didn't let the cop visit the stalker because she's dumb. Thankfully though, my car unlocked. I hopped in and drove away. Problem is, Drew already knew where I lived. I had to move out 2 weeks later and blocked him on all social media. Eventually, he managed to make another Facebook profile and sent me a message that summer saying he was praying for me and had forgiven me for trashing him to people, even though I never told anyone what happened. That was the last I saw and heard of him. Unfortunately, this predator continued to serve at that church in the junior high ministry of all places, around many young girls. No one on the church leadership listened to me, or to Bree. I never reached out to her to let her know what happened to me, and I never got to hear her full story in detail. I did tell the young adult pastor about the knife and him trying to get sexual with me, and how I was scared. Thankfully, I don't go to that church anymore. This was all pre-Me Too movement. What sucks the most is I've had quite a few experiences with crazy religious dudes just like him. This was the first, but definitely not the last. I'm still trying to come to terms with why exactly that is.